Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to another Tice Talk. Yes, it's Thursday, but it's the afternoon. We are normally 10 o'clock in the morning, of course, on Thursday, as our avid viewers will know. We switched to 4 p.m. to make way for one of our speakers today, who's joining us from the US. We'll come on to those guys later on. I hope you've all been well. It's been a little bit of a break since I've done a Tice Talk. Jenny did one about a week ago. And then, of course, it's Easter, some time off for Easter. And I've been doing a DIY, which is why I am now a ruined man. I woke up very tired this morning, body aching, and decided that to get through this, I needed to eat some sweets. So I ate lots of sweets, and now I feel queasy. So it's not going well. It's not a good afternoon. This is why we shouldn't do these Tice Talks in the afternoon. It's just too much effort. But look, thank you so much for joining us. As I say, we are every week, Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. Do stick us in your diary, make us your appointment to view. We are discussing all of the key tech security topics with our fantastic panelists. And today, our issue that we're going to be discussing is zero trust. Quick confession at the beginning, I've kind of pretended to know what zero trust was on about really for the last, kind of 2-3 years. I kind of roughly get it, but I'm hoping to get a lot of information from our panelists today. So bear with me if I ask the stupid questions, but who knows, maybe some of you on our webinar are also still getting up to speed on zero trust. If you're not, and if you're down this journey, have been following this and been doing it and have some insights and some wisdom to share, please get involved. We've got the chat window open. Give us your comments, give us your thoughts. If you've got war stories to share, stuff that went right, stuff that went wrong, please do share it with us. There's also the questions tab if you want to ask a question directly of our panelists. Also, because we're going to be talking about zero trust, I inevitably have an earworm in my head, a song with the word trust in it. If you can guess what that song is, type it in the chat, have a go. If there's a song with trust in it, in the title of the words, you may win a Tice Talk mug. That is today's giveaway, if you can guess the song that's in my head. But more importantly, I should introduce our panelists who are going to be guiding us through the territory of zero trust. Really good panel, really nice rounded panel we've got for you today. John Rufus, who's the CISO at Pharos Security, previously been on Tice Talk before. We've got Rob Hornbuckle, who is CISO of Allegiant Air, and also Jason Sirocco, who is CTO of PKI at Sectigo. So we're covering it from both the vendors and the users kind of point of view. So I hope that is, I hope that's good. Oh my God. I was going to introduce Andrew Aiken from Twitter. And Andrew has immediately guessed exactly the song that I was thinking of with trust in the title. It is Trust in Me from the Jungle Book. But Andrew, I'm afraid panelists are not allowed to win the mug. You're exempt. Sorry. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. How are you doing? I think you're on mute. If you unmute yourself quickly, that would be good. There you go.
I'm doing well. Apparently much better than you. Didn't get that sugar rush from Easter or the hangover that is inevitably going to follow.
Good stuff. And whereabouts in the US are you joining us from? Where's home?
I'm in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area.
And how are things? I've never been to Tulsa, Oklahoma. What's it like?
I haven't either, but I hear things are really nice. At least I haven't been into the Tulsa area or into Tulsa pretty much for the last year.
Yes, nobody's really been anywhere for pretty much the last year. So who knows? One day we will do these conferences again, and we will look forward to welcoming you in the UK when we can. So Twitter, you are zero trust lead technical architect at Twitter. Now, I just want to first of all say, I think I found your Twitter account. Am I saying you have an account on Twitter?
You know, I actually do have an account on Twitter that I've had for, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years. I think I may have sent out one tweet in that entire time.
I can tell you, you now have a total following base of 3 people, one of whom is me. I literally added 50% to your follower account by finding you.
Yeah, I may have a few more followers on LinkedIn than I do on Twitter.
Well, listen, Tice Talk folks, if you can find Andrew on Twitter, do follow him. But for your place, so you're not obliged as a Twitter employee. There's no sort of thing saying you have to have a Twitter account, I suppose.
Yeah, let's just keep that between you and I, though.
Fair enough. Look, let's go back a little bit before Twitter. What's your sort of background? Where did you start working in InfoSec, and where did you move after that?
All right. Well, basically, I got my introduction into information security and cybersecurity when I was running a telephone company and internet service, and one of our servers was pwned, and so we then had to, make it a priority to ensure that didn't happen again. And that's actually where I initially started working on zero trust, although this was long before zero trust was a term in the vernacular, but we implemented network level microsegmentation, which is one of the core components of a mature zero trust implementation. And so I've been dealing with that and implementing that at multiple organizations for probably the last 20 years or so.
And so at the time, is it that zero trust has been with us for ages and it's only just had the term coined? Or at the time you were doing that, was that considered quite a radical step to go down that really segmented route?
I think it was a fairly radical step at that time. I think it has become a bit more mainstream. The problem that most organizations face when implementing a network level of microsegmentation is the sheer number of man hours that are going to be required for maintaining it, as opposed to today's solutions, which can automate many of those tasks, making it much more feasible for organizations to be able to not only do network level microsegmentation, but application or layer 7 microsegmentation as well.
So you were doing it sort of more manually, to put it in layman's terms. You having to go in and actually get your hands dirty to separate things out.
Yeah, I mean, each different system would have to have a different set of rules that we could automate some of the tasks, but most of the time, whenever a network change occurred or new systems were added, it would require manual changes to each one of the system's firewalls. Right.
Okay. But do you feel as a result of that you've learned, because obviously now you can ship things in and you can deploy them and they will do a lot of that work automatically. Do you think that was a beneficial experience though for you, going through and having to do it manually?
Oh, absolutely. And from that time forward, we never had another breach in our systems at Globalize, which was the telephone company. At least not any that were able to move past the initial system where the breach occurred. And that is really the primary focus of microsegmentation, is to isolate systems from the others so that if a breach occurs, they can't move to, or do lateral movement to other systems within that network segment. And so at Globalize and at the other places that I've implemented that, we've been able to successfully limit the amount of lateral movement that occurs whenever a system does get compromised. Subsequent to that, I also taught cybersecurity at the university level and was one of the people responsible for the development of our cybersecurity degree program, and also spent quite a bit of time at Deloitte, where I was working with them on the development of their zero trust point of view, their marketing strategy, and actually going out and doing zero trust assessments for some of our larger clients.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, we'll get into nubbins of zero trust a bit later on, but when you brought up a point there that I think is quite interesting, because I've always associated zero trust with users, with end identities. This again shows that my level of maturity about knowledge of zero trust. You're also talking about zero trust between parts of the system, parts of the actual system, between parts of the organization, and so on.
Right, and certainly if you listen to many vendors speak about zero trust, they're going to be focusing on the area of zero trust that their particular solution is going to be able to address. And for many vendors, that's going to be revolving around identity. Now, identity is certainly going to be one of the first places that organizations may want to look for starting down their path to getting a more mature zero trust architecture in place, but it's not the only location within the organization and the security environment that zero trust is going to come into play.
And so I want to again, I'll sort of come back to the mechanics of zero trust, because I think that's the stuff I'm quite interested in, and I hope our audience are as well. By the way, if you're not interested in those bits, please put in the chat and I'll direct it as you wish. It is your webinar very much. But I'm interested, Andrew, in terms of the evolution from there. So Deloitte, then you went to Twitter. I have this idea that organizations like Twitter are so on security. They would have been doing zero trust, and nailed this years ago. When you arrived, though, was there still some way to go? Is it still a new thing for them, or what was your experience like of arriving at Twitter and having that thing where you switch the computer on, you find out what you're up against?
Right. And one of the things that is also a common misunderstanding about zero trust is that, it's not a binary state. It's not you either have zero trust or you don't have zero trust. Zero trust is more of a journey than a destination. And so I've developed a zero trust assessment framework, which will allow an organization to determine what their current zero trust maturity level is and identify areas where it can be improved. Now, when I started at Twitter, they had a pretty good score on the zero trust measurements when it comes to identity, but some of the other areas were a little bit more lacking. And so we're working on putting together a roadmap for how we can achieve a higher level of zero trust maturity across all of the different domains of zero trust.
Zero trust strikes me as one of these things as well that the small, normally in cybersecurity, the smaller the organization you are, the more of a struggle because you haven't got the budget, you haven't got the kit and the people. But with zero trust, it strikes me the smaller the organization you are, the easier it's going to be for you, right? Because you can there's only two people, you just don't trust each other and you're in. Am I right?
If you have two people, you just don't trust your partner. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But certainly for small organizations, it's easier to get the fundamentals of zero trust implemented because you don't have as many infrastructure components that are going to be dependent upon each other that are going to be impacted by the implementation of a new model. For large organizations, there's a lot more planning that's going to be involved in being able to implement those projects that are going to lead to a more robust zero trust environment.
So that's interesting. So part of your calculation as an organization has to be, what size are you in terms of headcount? What size are you in terms of your systems? So for example, Twitter, relative to the valuation of the company, has got a fairly small headcount, but has got a huge amount of kit going on. So for you, you're sort of more focused on the technology side than you are necessarily on the internal Twitter users side, your employee side, for example.
Right. So, my focus right now is primarily on the enterprise side, not on the application side that is going to be the customer facing applications. Certainly one is going to have an impact on the other. And we have to be cognizant of, those impacts, but we're focused primarily on the, zero trust projects on the enterprise architecture within Twitter.
Right. I see. So talk me through it. I mean, as you say, you've developed this kind of roadmap as to where we go with zero trust and how that works. Obviously, we don't have time maybe to go through the whole thing now, but broadly speaking, what's the general starting point what's the baseline you have to be at before you can even sort of start thinking about zero trust?
Well, I mean, certainly it begins with understanding what your current operating environment is. And that includes, what regulatory frameworks that you're going to be required or you aspire to adhere to, what the current state of your environment is, making sure that you have all the fundamentals in place. I like to reference the CIS Top 20, for example, as a starting place before beginning the journey towards zero trust, because unless you have the basics in place, trying to implement some of the higher level zero trust maturity architectures is not going to be nearly as productive. You've got to start, with the basics when it comes to asset management, having least privilege, having a good threat intelligence feed, basic network segmentation, encryption, and, the ability to identify, where the different data elements are on your network. All of that needs to take place before you can actually really begin that journey towards a more mature zero trust environment.
But isn't that a slight issue? Because the CIS framework, there's a link, by the way, in our chat for people watching to that CIS framework. All of those things that you talked about, that are good to have in place before you do zero trust. I think there's some organizations watching who'd say, well, hang on, I've got my hands full doing all of that. Maybe in a few years' time, once I've worked through all of that, I'll get onto zero trust. Isn't that the problem? That if you're saying you need to have all these things done first, you could get to the point where you never really get onto doing zero trust.
And it's unfortunately a necessary evil. We've got to be able to handle the fundamentals before we can move on to more robust security frameworks, including Zero Trust. Now, one of the things that we were talking about the NSA article earlier, and at the end of that article, one of the things they say is that the top focus of security must be how it adds business value, followed by how it reduces business risks and increases business resilience. Instead of focusing just on the threats, but I would also add to that when it comes to Zero Trust that it will also improve the user experience, improve productivity, and a lot of that is due to the amount of automation and orchestration that would typically be involved in a robust Zero Trust implementation. And that is going to help to alleviate some of the administrative overhead associated with some of those lower level CIS top 20 tasks.
Right.
And so automation and orchestration can surely reduce the overall management and implementation costs of the security infrastructure throughout the organization.
Good stuff. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I get it. The chat, by the way, has got a link to the NSA, well, a link to an article about the NSA guidance on Zero Trust. For folks in the UK, there's also the NCSC's put out some guidelines as well about Zero Trust, which I will try and find a link to if I can find them. And actually, Andrew, on that point you were making, we've had a question from Paul here, which is, are there trade-offs to be made between Zero Trust and systems performance? Interesting one. What do you think, in your experience, how's it been? Be honest.
Honestly, my experience is that Zero Trust implementation can actually improve system performance and the productivity of the users that are responsible for developing those applications. And the reason is that when we take a look at cybersecurity piecemeal, and we're trying to address this specific problem by installing this agent and that agent, and having people go through this process, or have this particular administrative change to all of the different systems. That adds a lot of overhead to what those servers and those systems are going to need to be able to do to perform their tasks. When we take a look at the cybersecurity infrastructure as a whole, as a part of the Zero Trust framework, we can identify overlap between those different piecemeal components of security that have been implemented over the years, and help to reduce some of that burden from those systems and from the people that are responsible for administering those systems.
I'm going to bring in the rest of our panelists in a sec, but I just want to I want to ask a couple of potentially very stupid questions, because there's a couple of things about Zero Trust that have puzzled me. At the point where you verify somebody, you have to have some kind of verification. Let's use the individual as an example, a person rather than a piece of kit. There's a level at which you decide to trust them, and from then on they have that level of trust. How often do you keep having to revoke people's level of trust and then reassign them trust in a Zero Trust system? It doesn't strike me as workable to just, it's like if everywhere you go in the building you're constantly asked for your security pass. That's obviously not feasible. Do you see what I'm saying? How does it actually work in practice, this?
Well, I mean, one of the core principles of the identity component of the Zero Trust model is continuous verification. Yeah, when you first log into the system and you've passed all of your credentials, and your system itself also has been deemed to be worthy of being able to connect to those resources, that is not where the authentication and authorization process ends. It is going to be continuous authorization throughout the entire session.
I beg your pardon. I had a call come in and the camera switched off. I do apologize. Sorry, Andrew. Yes, you were saying. So there's the verification step. Yes.
But the interactivity between the user and the system is not necessarily going to need to require additional input from the user. But the system and the credentials that are being passed are going to be continuously verified behind the scenes.
Right. So for the user, there might be one or more experiences of that, but behind the scenes, there's lots of repeated checks going on. Yeah, interesting. The other, just one more stupid question before we bring the panelists. Obviously, there's data. There's sort of pools of data and repositories of data in an organization. How does zero trust work in terms of different systems having access to those different pools of data? Is that, and if the central repository of data would presumably have to have maximum trust, is that how that works? I'm just trying to think of, if you've got different systems, different parts of your organization trying to access data, you've got to work out what permissions they have under this zero trust model. Is that, not sure that I'm so clear there, but.
And, a part of that is going to be addressed through application level microsegmentation, where we identify the specific circumstances in which requests to resources are going to be allowed. And so that is going to be done at, a very granular level, so that, this application at this, instance in time from this system is going to be allowed to, access this particular resource. And it's going to be at that moment in time that request is going to be analyzed and determined whether or not it will be granted.
Right. Okay. So it is resolvable within the system to have those different parts having access to that data store.
Right. I mean, we're talking about, least privilege taken to the extreme, and it is not going to be something that is persistent, but will have to be evaluated with each request.
Yeah, interesting. I see why you need this level of automation, because you're constantly having to go through this verification. One question's come in from Manny, which is it true to say zero trust? I think it's a good point, actually. Is it true to say zero trust is not the same as zero harm? A trusted personal device may still have malicious intent. We're bringing our other panelists on while you're speaking, Andrew. While you think about that, Andrew, I'll introduce our other panelists just so that our audience know. We have Jason Soroka, who's CTO of PKI at Sectigo. We have John Rufus, who's CISO at Pharos Security. We're expecting at some stage, I think he may be joining us now, Rob Hornbuckle, who's CISO of Allegiant Air. Guys, before I come to you, rest of you on the panel, Andrew, I just wanted you, if you can, to finish off that thought. Manny's point about, does zero trust equal zero harm, or could a trusted person still be malicious? I think it's an interesting one.
Right. And, certainly this is where I believe, if I'm following the intent of the question, least privilege taken to its extreme, as well as, role-based access controls and attribute-based access controls come into play, that, we want to make sure that somebody is only going to be able to access those resources that they are explicitly authorized to be able to get to. Now, somebody that has that access because of the role that they have within an organization could still have malicious intent. And that's where, we can't rely just on the identity component in order to be able to determine whether or not somebody is able to access those resources. But what happens to those resources after they've been retrieved by somebody that's authorized to get them? That's where things like data loss prevention are going to come into play, or DLP. What happens to those resources once they are, in the possession of somebody that is authorized to get them?
It's your classic malicious insider conundrum. Good stuff. Thank you for that, Andrew. Really, really interesting. Good answer, I thought, on that. Guys, welcome the rest of your panel. Rob, can I come to you first? Allegiant Air is a US airline, but so we may not be familiar with it. Just describe a little bit about Allegiant Air and how big you guys are.
So we are a primary US carrier. Actually, we're only US currently. And the easiest way to explain it to people from Europe is we run a very similar model to Ryanair here in the United States. We have roughly 100 plus planes, 100, 120, somewhere in that neighborhood, and do a very good business here in the US.
Good stuff. And Rob, before we move on from you, in terms of zero trust, was this something that was already in place when you started working there, or is this something that you've been implementing since you arrived?
So zero trust is the goal. Very few places it's in place already. In the US, it doesn't happen very often unless you're doing something involved with military type processes. So here it isn't necessarily utilized, but it's the goal of where we're trying to get to.
Right, interesting. Just wanted to sort of work out where you are on the journey. John, can I come to you next from Pharos Security? As a sort of from a sort of vendor approach, is Zero Security now in the mix as part of your consultancy with clients, and how does it generally go down? Are they, when you bring it up, do they say, yeah, I'm into that, or do they take a bit of convincing?
It actually has suffered a little bit, I think, from all the noise that's been made by vendors over the last year or so. And what's refreshing about listening to Andrew speak today is that there's a lot more to it than just, is this a person I should let on my system? But originally, the concept of Zero Trust started that it was validating that this person is a legitimate person that I'm going to let on my system, and make sure that I can have some sort of level of trust for him in that respect. Organizations that I work with vary from very small organizations of just a handful of people that may just have some workstations that are put together to a lot of work which I've done in the United States has really been with critical infrastructure, with power stations, for example, where you want to be really sure as to where all your critical infrastructure is separated from everybody else, and only specific people can access that, and you can validate who they are. So the need is always there. The marketing's probably diluted it a little bit, but there certainly is a need to be able to continue this, and it is something that everybody needs to strive for.
Good stuff. Thanks, John. By the way, our chat is still open. If people have got comments, thoughts they want to put in, question tab is still open there as well. And if anybody also has got a song involving trust that they want to throw in, there's a mug to win. If you can name a song that replaces the current earworm I've got. John, just coming back to you for a second. Earlier on, I made a sort of fairly fatuous comment about the fact that if you're a smaller organization, Zero Trust is easy to implement. Have you found that, though, as a consultant for companies? You know, when you go in, there's only 5 people. Do you breathe a sigh of relief and think, oh, this will be an easy gig then?
No, it's not quite like that. Conceptually, it is, but depending on the organization, there may be restrictions as to the hardware that they have, the amount of money that they can spend, and is it also fit for purpose as to what they want to do. And so one of the things that and I always use the analogy from operational technology to describe whether this is something that I need to separate or what sorts of controls I need to have that. And that is because you can have a small organization that can look after equipment that is only worth a few $1,000s, or you can have an organization that looks after CT scanners, which cost $1 million or $1.5 million each. And then from a functional point of view, you still go through the process as to what I need to do for Zero Trust, but the impact, if something happens to it, is immeasurably different. And so, so conceptually, I think you still follow the same process, but I don't think it gets any easier. And certainly when you're talking about scale of that sort of machinery that you're trying to protect.
Interesting. Paul Kazma, by the way, is coming with Billy Joel's A Matter of Trust. Never heard of it, never heard of the song, so you don't win the mug, sorry. Jason, can I come to you now, please? The Sectigo, can you just give us the overview of the company for folks who are new to it, and also your role, your CTO of PKI, which wasn't one I'd come across before.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Sectigo, basically, digital identities really important to us. That's obviously where we come from in our heritage. So we're one of the world's largest commercial certificate authorities. So you think about the issuance of SSL certificates. That's a very large piece of our business. But another very large growing part of our business as well is digital identities for private trust. And that includes everything from IoT devices, DevOps, various forms of authentication, you name it. We are, I think you talked a little earlier about how this is going to be solved is through automation and PKI infrastructure for private trust. One of the ways in which we're innovating a lot right now is through automation of getting those digital identities where they need to be, and then integrating the systems to perform these important tasks in Zero Trust. And in terms of my title of CTO, basically there's quite a lot of what we're talking about right now, which is a lot of public outreach, but I also deal a lot with basically helping out with product strategy. This is my 21st year in digital identities and PKI, public key infrastructure. And I think it was Werner Vogels who had defined a quadrant of 4 different CTOs, and I think I fit 2 of his boxes, which are public outreach and also internal corporate strategy.
Good stuff. Happy 21st, Jason, in that case.
Yeah.
Mark Dearlove has suggested The Cure, Trust. Again, never heard of the song. Sorry, no mug for you. Jason, can I come back to you for a second, though, because you raised an interesting point there. I think part of this is also about working out your resources. Like, how many people have you got? Where are they all? What is your directory of them? Is that up to date? What are your resources like? What kit are you using? There's almost a sort of inventory type exercise, right, at the beginning that you have to do. Am I right on that?
Andrew and yourself were talking earlier about getting the fundamentals right first. That is absolutely the truth. I think that one of the first things you need to inventory is your crown jewels. What are the things you worried about the most? Where is the risk in your organization? We were talking about scaling that as well. Large organizations have different worries, different risks. Smaller organizations, their worries are just as big, even though they're scaled smaller. The impact of the business could be even larger than a larger organization, ironically. I think that as absolutely as part of your inventorying process, part of understanding your digital assets absolutely is everything that needs to carry a digital identity, whether it's a device, a person, an application, APIs. I don't think a lot of people know this, but there are certificate authorities sitting underneath DevOps servers right now that are not part of your normal governance at the moment. You have young developers that are creating these systems that have fundamental identity systems that are not under your normal governance structure. These are the things that, even though you might not have fixed yet, you absolutely need to take inventory of these things at the moment.
Interesting stuff. I want to come on to Rob on that point then, in that case, because obviously you're going through this sort of process from for a guy in an organization point of view. How easy has it been for you to kind of get a handle on all of these different resources? It strikes me as a nightmare, but then I don't work for an airline. How's it been?
Well, we're very distributed just because we're in so many airports. Add that to the fact that we've now been highly distributed thanks to the work from home that COVID has created. Kind of shifts where our initial concentration was and where we would want to start. Originally, we were starting with a micro-segmentation plan, just because we had control over everything. Everybody was connecting in through our systems. We knew and we could trust everyone because it was only our equipment. As COVID happened and everything dispersed, we no longer have that capability. So we've had to pivot and shift and concentrate more on the identity side. Not that I'm saying identity would be all of Zero Trust, but it's where we have to start now just because our environment's changed so drastically.
I think that's a really good point. Andrew, can I come to you on that? Because obviously, as Rob's pointed out, partly through working from home, partly through other factors, there's your organization's own stuff, but you've got other people's stuff being bolted on. How does that feed into the Zero Trust picture?
Well, again, we need to make sure that we look at the cybersecurity infrastructure holistically, not just piecemeal. Everything needs to be put into a formalized strategy so that we can identify those projects that are going to have the best bang for the buck early on. For many organizations, that is going to be on the identity side of Zero Trust, because that is where a lot of organizations are lacking the most, and it is certainly going to be the first point of contact with the security infrastructure that most people are going to have. But for our different organizations, they may have other needs that supplant identity as the first major project that they would want to embark on for increasing their Zero Trust maturity.
Yeah. Can I stay with you, Andrew, for a question? I'll come to panelists with this as well. It's from John T. Rhodes. By the way, John T. guessed Trust by Megadeth as the song title. Again, never heard of it. Janis Joplin, Trust Me, Mark Dearlove's gone for, never heard of that. Martin Hopkins, Prince, Trust from the Batman soundtrack. So far, none of these are ringing my bell, but there you go. But John T. has asked, most importantly, I'll throw the question up on screen. Zero Trust is just another security term for security people, in inverted commas, that's the thing. How do we show it really adds business value as an enabler? Zero Trust sounds like the ultimate blocker. Andrew, do you want to throw, because you slightly addressed this earlier, do you want to throw in an answer to that and how you can do that?
I mean, I look at cybersecurity infrastructure as a progression over time where, we started with, a flat network. We added a firewall and thought that we were safe. And, that protected everything on the inside of our network. Then we found out that there were ways to get, around that firewall. We embarked on network segmentation, putting firewalls between each one of the different network segments, creating, kind of a defense in depth strategy. Zero trust is an evolution of that concept where, with the, traditional defense in depth strategy where we have our network segments, we have, multiple moats and castles to protect our, crown jewels. But if somebody is able to, breach any one of those defense mechanisms that are in place, then they have, free reign to move to other systems within that network segment. That's what, to me, differentiates zero trust from other paradigms of network security, is to, isolate those breached systems so that they aren't able to get to other systems within those network segments.
Right. Yeah. John, can I come to you on that point then? Obviously, you're going into organizations and you're assisting them with this. Imagine that you have somebody who says, "Oh God, zero trust. Here's another thing that I have to implement. It's another thing on my list of things to do." What's then the argument? How do you sort of go about bringing that person around?
And there's a lot of things that I can show as to why it's important to be able to do. And the concept of zero trust itself is something that has evolved, and it is still very much a living organism, more to the lines as what Andrew has identified. Because when it started to get popular was originally when people were saying, I've got to put all my data into the cloud. I've got to have some sort of zero trust to stop people from getting into the cloud to get into my data. And it's evolved from there. So it's grown from there. There are things that do influence this. Obviously, there are policies and frameworks that you need to have. And the most important one, I think, is the acceptable use policy. And so if you have somebody who's working for your organization, they're required to work to guidelines and processes and equipment which is supplied by the organization, and follow that. And you want to make sure that that person is able to do their job as best as possible, and you can protect them to ensure that their livelihood continues through there as well. If you have somebody that comes in who isn't somebody who's been validated by your processes or segmented, then all of that goes at risk, and the cost as to what that is could be enormous. It is a question of risk. It is not just of frameworks, not just of aligning to policies, but what's the risk, what's the likelihood, and what's the impact to your organization if you don't do it. And so when you do it from that point of view, and you can associate a dollar sign to it and actually say in numbers, this is what's likely to happen if you don't do it. Here's worst, and it is worst case scenario. But we've gone to the point now where it is generally understood that this is something that we have to do as part of building our systems, as part, and really the concept of it, because asset management is foundational. We've got to provide assets in the first place, so we should know what they are and we should know who's using them. So from that point of view, it's very easy to argue in that respect that this is something that we really need to do.
Interesting stuff. I'm going to come to Jason with this next question, and then maybe throw it out to the panel. There we go. This is from Frixos. Apologies if I got the name pronounced wrong. I'll do my best with that. How do you manage trust in a multi-vendor ecosystem?
Wow, this is becoming a lot more important, especially as systems become more interdependent. Companies are finding a lot of value in having their equipment being able to talk to other equipment. Think about infrastructure such as energy systems, even aircraft systems, as we're talking about with Rob. Basically, if you want to have equipment talk to each other securely across an airport tarmac, and these devices or even individuals are coming in from different consulting regimens, coming in from different vendors, how do you make all these things interact? And obviously, it's going to start with a standard. These organizations typically will join a consortia. And then what we're finding is a lot of the international consortia going on right now are choosing digital identity structures such as PKI to be able to actually then have a trust model which starts not from any one of the vendors, but starts from a root of trust that's typically run by a public certificate authority. Basically, what all that means is everybody on this panel so far, we're talking about we're obsessed, and we should be obsessed with what's happening inside of your own internal enterprise network. But what happens when you have to start connecting out to partners? What happens when you start having systems that you want to be talking to each other, whether down at your customer level or even if it's from a business to business level? Typically, you're going to need some root of trust that's outside of yourself, that's then extending trust implicitly within that system. So once again, digital identity becomes kind of an important fundamental foundation of how to be able to enact that.
Really good point. Thank you for that, Jason. I think Mark Moore asked a question: with so many people working remotely, how does a PKI certificate protect your company? And I think, Jason, that answer sort of addresses that as well. I want to come to Rob now. Just on that point, actually, as you've been going along, has it been instantly clear to you that there's a whole raft of stuff outside your organization that you're going to have to think about? Or was your concern, get the inside of my organization sorted and then I'll think about the rest of it? Or did you try and pursue the both at once?
Well, I'm in a little bit of an envious position in the fact of we actually don't use a lot of external vendors. It's the methodology of our company that our interaction with customers is our business advantage. And we custom program every single interaction that we have with all of our customers.
Wow.
So,
really?
yeah, we actually maintain between 8 and 15 development teams at any given time, for which I'm responsible for all of the DevSec for, which is a different issue entirely to this. But because of that, we don't have a huge number of vendors. And the vendors that we do have are normally the large, known, well-named ones like Microsoft and SAP and Oracle. And it's a lot easier to integrate that level of security in with them than it would be some of the smaller and startup type vendors that we don't actually use.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're fairly self-contained. That goes back to my point where in a way, smaller and simpler is better for zero trust, I suppose. Andrew, can I come back to you? We're just in the sort of closing moments now, closing minutes. You talked about the framework that you've developed, and I talked about what you needed to get to before almost you started on this journey. But if somebody is thinking, okay, my cybersecurity is pretty good, I've done the basics, I think I'm ready to start now with zero trust. What's the sort of starting point for most organizations?
Well, I mean, generally we need to start with, as I was saying before, understanding the environment, the regulatory frameworks and industry frameworks that we aspire to or are required to adhere to make sure that the controls that are required within those frameworks are going to be addressed with your security environment. Then we need to do an assessment of where we are right now. So, utilizing, some type of assessment methodology for zero trust, take a look and see where it is that you're at right now. Then you need to determine where it is that you're wanting to go. Not everyone is going to need to, get to the highest level of zero trust across all of the different domains. I mean, it would be cost prohibitive and time prohibitive for many organizations to attempt to do so. So what is your, risk threshold? What is it that you are willing to accept for risk within your organization? Then you could use that to determine what your aspirations are for your zero trust maturity level, and then develop a roadmap in order to be able to achieve those goals.
Interesting stuff. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. That was a good roundup. And I thank you to you guys, because I've learned an awful lot about zero trust that I needed to find out. So I feel like I've selfishly hogged this panel to up my own knowledge. But listen, I hope our viewers have also had a chance to get some knowledge and to get some insights from our panelists there. By the way, winner of the mug, I'm going to go for Chelsea Cashwell, who suggested Etta James, Trust in Me. I've never heard the song, but I'm a massive Etta James fan. So the mug goes to Chelsea. Congratulations to you. And also thank you so much to our panel. It's been really, really good to hear from you guys. Andrew Aiken, Zero Trust Lead Technical Architect at Twitter. John Rufus, who's CISO at Firewall Security. Rob Hornbuckle, great name, by the way, CISO at Allegiant Air. And Jason Sirocco, who is CTO of PKI at Sectigo. Thank you all of you for joining us for this panel. I think it's been really illuminating. Next Tuesday, Jenny, on a related subject, is going to be talking about the insider threat. That's going to be 10 o'clock 4 o'clock next week on Tuesday morning. I'll be back next week at 10 a.m. on Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic rest of the afternoon. Take care of yourselves. See you soon. Cheerio.